Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to have a debate, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And I'm going to let you begin with the 5 minutes. And what I've asked Muhammad to do is to show me and to prove to us how Islam began from the classical model. And I'm going to say and critique him from historical, what history tells us.
We said it's going to be Islam versus Christianity and stuff like that, yeah?
The emergence of Islam, how Islam began
Versus Christianity. Okay.
versus Christianity from the classical model versus the historical model.
This is going to be interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me when to start. Okay,
Go ahead, start.
Let's start right here. And right now, can you choose? All right. What I want to say generally is that Islam, as a basic thing, has two connotations. We can say there's Islam with a small I and Islam with the big I. Islam with a small I literally means submission in Arabic. It comes from the Arabic word istislam. We believe that every prophet was a Muslim in the sense that they were submissive to their Lord. So we believe that the first human being to be on this planet, Adam, was in fact submissive and was Muslim. So if the question is how did Islam emerge, the answer is simply that Islam emerged when the first human being set foot on this earth. That's how Islam emerged. Now if you're talking about Islam with the big I, which has a connotation of Prophet Muhammad, and other than that, then clearly that happened in the 7th century with the birth and prophethood of what we call Prophet Muhammad, the last and final messenger. We say that these two prophets all came, and all those who came between them, which some hadith says 124,000 prophets, all came with the same fundamental message to believe in the one God and to worship the one God. This message is not only iterated and reiterated in the Quranic discourse, but no doubt it's iterated and reiterated in the biblical discourse, which is why you'll find in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and 6 verse number 4, where it says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Elohim Adonai Echad. That, hear, O Israel, your Lord, our Lord is one God. Now here, my question is, this has always been the theological underpinning of all of the prophetic saints, including Moses and Abraham and Jesus, which is why you'll find in the Old Testament that there really is nothing that indicates a Trinity. And I challenge J. Smith today to prove to the contrary of that. I challenge J. Smith today to give me one unequivocal, unambiguous...
We're not talking about the Trinity.
No,
let's keep to the history of Islam.
Excuse me. Unambiguous verse in the Old Testament which refers to the Trinity. Because what we're saying is, how did both of these religions
hold on
start?
to that.
How did Islam start versus how did Christianity start? The answer is this: Islam has always been there, as I've just explained, my model. However, Christianity undertook a clear historical development, which is what I will prove today, which started with Binitarianism and continued on to Trinitarianism, and Theodosius II in the year 381 literally forced Christians to adopt the triune position and to completely forget about all of the other models, including Arianism and subordinationism. So here, if you compare the theological underpinnings of Islam and how Islam is consistent with all of its prophets,
Can you hear him?
With the Christian message, and how, number one, the Old Testament is not consistent with the New Testament, and number two, that it was clear to any objective historian that there was a clear historical development in Christianity, that which meant for the councils like Council of Nicaea, Constantinople, Chalcedon in 325, 381 and 451 respectively, to formulate the theological creed of the Christians. My question is, why don't you just go back to what the Old Testament says? Why don't you go back to Deuteronomy chapter number 6, verse number 4, where it clearly states, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohim Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, your Lord, our Lord is one God. This is the kind of thing that all of the prophets came with. This is the same message that the Prophet Muhammad came with, and no doubt we believe this is the same message that Jesus came with. How long do I have left? 1 minute, that's brilliant. Okay, now, so the things I've been able to raise here in today's discussion. Point one, that Islam has two different connotations. You have Islam with a small I, and you have Islam with the big I. Islam with the small I is submission, which all of the prophets, he's still got a minute, we've got 40 seconds. Got 43 seconds. 43 seconds. Islam with the small I has always been in existence. In fact, it exists for inanimate and animate because anything can submit to God's law. And this is exactly the same thing as Jesus has said. That I have not come to submit to myself, but to the Father who sent me in John chapter 5, verse 8. I just say, listen, let's go back to Jesus' message. That's being a true Christian. If you want to be a true Christian today, it's not to follow this made-up concept by churches of the Trinity. Ladies and gentlemen, to be a true Christian means to go back to what Moses says, to Abraham says, and to what Jesus says. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, your Lord, our Lord, is one Lord.
Thanks, Muhammad. Now, have you noticed he used the Islam with the big I and Islam with the small I? His definition of Islam with the small I are all people that want to believe, but the big I are those that specifically follow the Prophet Muhammad. I'm going to use two different definitions for small I and big I. I would suggest that the big I is the historical Islam, the small I is the Islam of faith. And the Islam of faith is dependent on some fraudulent material. Now, what do you mean by fraudulent material? Everything he's going to tell you about how Islam began. Now, he says that Abraham was a Muslim. I'm sure he wasn't. Moses was a Muslim. I'm sure he wasn't. Jesus was a Muslim. None of the prophets were Muslim. This word didn't even exist at the time that they were living in 1900 BC, 1400 BC, and the first century. But what we do know is that even the Prophet Muhammad, his Prophet Muhammad, we have difficulty knowing who he was. Because you've all heard that Prophet Muhammad was born in 570 and died in 632. Started receiving revelations in 610 to 632 for 22 years. But where does that story come from? Where does the story of Muhammad come from? Does it come from people that knew him? No, it doesn't. Who was the first to write down about the story of Muhammad that we have today? Where's the first extant material? Written by Ibn Hisham is his name. He died in 833. Muhammad died in 632. 200 years before they finally get the story of Muhammad down. Now, what about the things he said? The hadith. You have Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi. Look at all these hadith, these sayings of the Prophet. When did Al-Bukhari die? 870. That's 240 years after Muhammad died. So everything he's going to tell you about the Muhammad or Islam with the small I is dependent on source material that comes from Ibn Hisham 833, Al-Waqidi 835, Sahih Muslim 870. Everyone that comes after Bukhari is post 870. The tafsir only get first written down by a man named Al-Tabari 923. Now, can you see the problem? All they know about Islam with the small I comes from 200 to 300 years later. When you look at Jesus Christ, folks, we have material from the very century and from the very time period he lived. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John were all living at the time of Jesus Christ. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were writing within 30 to 40 years of Christ's death. Did they know Jesus? Yes, they did. Did they see Jesus? Yes, they did. Did they hear what he said? Yes, they did. Matthew and John were eyewitnesses to that which they wrote. Mark and Luke got it from the eyewitnesses. Show me one eyewitness of Muhammad from with any of his traditions, from what he said and what he did. You cannot show me anybody that was living at that time. They lived hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. Therefore, I would suggest the Islam, the big I Islam of history is not the real Islam. And we need to go back and unpack what we do now know about Islam. Where is it that this religion began? I only have a minute to do that. I can't do it in the first minute. But can you see, we're going to do like with like. We're going to look at the historical record for both religions. We're going to show that when you look at Christianity, when you look at the person of Jesus Christ, the fact that he died on the cross, something that Islam disputes, the fact that he rose again, that's what true Christians believe. Every Christian wants to know, did God, in the form of Jesus Christ, did he die and rise again? Is that a historical fact? Can we show that Jesus did die? Muslims can't do that. Muslims can only assume he did not die. There's only one reference in the Quran, Surah 4, Ayah 157. one reference to say he did not die. If he did not die and rise again, I'm damned. And so is everybody here who's listening to me. Christianity is not just the Trinity like he would like to say. Christianity is the fact that God came to earth, God died on the cross, God rose again for everyone here, and that's a historical event. What Muhammad did, what Muhammad said, we're now seeing is not historical. We're going to unpack that for you and show you what we mean. And we're going to show you how difficult it is going to be for Muhammad to show me that Islam, the big I, the real historical Islam, is the real Islam. We're going to show you the big C, Christianity. There is only one Christianity, and that's the historical Christianity. God bless you. Over to you, Muhammad.
Thank you very much, Jake. This is really going to become very embarrassing today. No.
Let them decide that.
No. This is going to be really, really embarrassing today. He says that the first books of Hadith, or the first books of, let's say, compilation of Ibn Hijab, Ibn Ishaq, which he couldn't pronounce properly, and I'm sure that he has not been able to tap those books in the primary source material because لا تستطيع أن تتكلم باللغة العربية الفصحى. هل تستطيع أن تتحدث باللغة العربية الفصحى؟
Sir, do you speak Greek to talk about?
So you can't speak Arabic, so you can't actually excuse me, calm down. That's point number one. Point number two here is what I wanted to make. Can you hear me, guys? Yeah? Is that he is making the fallacy of believing that because the compilers compiled the hadith 200 to 300 years after the Prophet's death, that the hadith didn't exist before that. How embarrassing. How ridiculous. How ahistorical. Do you not know how the science of hadith works according to the Muslims? You've been standing here for years, my friend, and you haven't bothered to ask someone like me how science of hadith works. Let me educate you. I know you're my elder, but I must educate you today. Yes, it will happen. You'll be educated, Jay Smith, by someone who is at least a third of your age. At least, actually, maybe not that bad. Okay, how so? Let me tell you something. The way the chains work, we have a chain. We have a chain for the Quran, we have many chains for the Quran, we have chains for the Hadith. All of those chains are for people that have actually met the Prophet, seen the Prophet. Let me give you one example. One Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which says, "Man kadaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawa maq'adahu min an-nar." Whoever lies about me intentionally, so let him prepare his seat in hellfire. This is narrated by at least 42 Sahabis, according to the scholars of Hadith. Some scholars of Hadith say 120 Sahabis, meaning companions of the Prophet, saw this and narrated it to other people. He's embarrassing himself, additionally, by trying to compare the Hadith sciences, which is something he doesn't have, with the biblical narrative. Now let's read the books of Bar-Arman. He said that the people that saw Jesus Christ, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, saw Jesus Christ. Not in scholarly circles. You can say that to your audiences, to your passive audience that are not educated maybe, to the rednecks in the Bible Belt region who are racist, some of them, and they just accept any preacher's words. Maybe you can make those statements there. But my friend, you can't make those statements to an educated audience who know very well that the scholarly works like the works of Bar-Arman indicate very well.
He says there is no shadow of time.
Excuse me.
Jesus died on
The scholarly works of Bar-Arman,
discredits the Quran.
those scholarly works indicate very clearly, guys, that Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, first of all, are pen names. We don't know who these guys are. The actual earliest sources are sources like Matthew, Mark and Luke. John is the oldest one according to Bar-Arman, and these sources come, as he said, about 100 years after Jesus Christ. No one saw Jesus and told us about him from the people that he's mentioned. He's lying to you, as he does usually, and he's been caught on camera talking about there's no pork being sold in Morrison's. That's a lie, and this is a lie, and that's an ahistorical account. So here, how can you account for the fact that you're standing here in front of me and the people here, your Christian friends, and telling us, you're telling us all to believe in a Bible which is not reliably transmitted? No, I challenge you. I challenge you to give me one chain of narration which goes back to the companions of Jesus. If you do the same to me, I will easily do it. In fact, let's do it now. We have chains of narration. For example, Asim He's been taught by Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who's been taught by Uthman, who's been taught by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One chain. Okay, do the same thing. Now I've shown you that this is just one singular chain, but actually you have thousands of Sahaba, of companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meeting him and writing down as well as verbally transmitting what he's done. How do you account for that, my friend? You can't read the primary source materials. I have to be the translating link that helps you. Don't stand there in a position of education. You're there in a position of learning now. You're there in a position of learning now. The child is going to teach the old man. No problem. The child is going to teach the old man because you don't know what I know. And that's the bottom line. Challenge one, get me a chain. Get me a chain that goes back to Jesus Christ. A chain of provenance that goes back to Jesus Christ. Option two, after you've given me the chain, if you can't get me the chain, then admit that actually the first person to see the first compilations we have are at least 100 years afterwards. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. Oh, I love what he's done. Do you notice he said the young man's going to teach the old man? I am the older man, and I do know what we're talking about. Let me ask him very quickly, where is this chain that he talks about? Where is there any document? He said they wrote them down. Where are those documents from the time of Muhammad through the 7th century, up into the 8th century, and into the 9th century? Why is it we don't have anything written down for 200 years? If he likes the chain so much, show me one piece of document. Show me. Where are they? They don't begin to appear until 833. That's why I said very clearly, the earliest manuscripts that we have, the earliest documentation we have for the Siratul Rasulullah, the first that we have is Ibn Hisham. He gets it from Ibn Ishaq, but he is not a student of Ibn Ishaq. He's dependent on someone else. Where did Al-Bukhari, writing in the late 9th century, 240 years later, where did he get his material from? There's nothing written down. Now you might say they didn't need to write it down. They memorized it. Folks, can you see what we're talking about? That's 240 years of oral tradition. Do you trust oral tradition? I don't trust it. If I were to tell you something, and he were to tell him, and he were to tell him, by the time it gets over to that man, what I've told you and what he's told me has been changed. And if that could happen in 15 minutes, can you imagine what happens in 240 minutes, 40 years? But here's the real problem. Why did none of these people write it down? The chain that he's going to come up with. Why did not one of them write it down? Were they not educated? Was there no writing material? Remember, by the time that Abdul Malik comes to power in 685, Islam had spread all the way from Spain in the west to India in the east. Are you telling me that from India to Spain, no one can read and write? Please, folks, the fact that nothing was written down, the fact that they cannot even come to anything that they can show us from the 7th century, from the 8th century of any of these traditions, proves that these were finally written down in the 9th century. And that's why we don't trust them. I don't trust oral tradition because I know how it can be embellished. I can know how it can be changed. We can even look at the Quran. Show me one Quran that comes from the 7th century. Show me one Quran that comes from the time of Uthman. Show me any manuscript, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Mayil manuscript, the Husseini manuscript, the Petropolitanus manuscript, the Sana manuscript, the 6 major manuscripts. Show me one of them that comes from the time of the Prophet himself, or that comes from the time of Uthman, that even comes from the same century as the time of Uthman, the 7th century. Folks, every one of these major manuscripts, the earliest that the Muslims have, only begin to appear in the 8th century. Now there's a problem there. We're talking about the 8th century. I know he loves to mock me. This is the only thing he can do. Mock is the only thing he has left, because he cannot come up with anything, any material to prove to you and me that the Quran or the traditions existed at the time of Muhammad or existed in the same time as Muhammad. Now, I won't do this to him because I'm too big for that. But see, can you see the problem? Be careful of what you're going to hear. Be careful of who you're listening to. He will tell you that these change of names are there. Yes, and that's all they are. They're nothing more than change of names. History is what we're looking at today. And the Islam with the big I The Islam of history has to be documented. The fact that we can go back to the Bodmer Papyrus, the John Rylands manuscripts, these are right here in Manchester, and also we have them in Switzerland. These are the kind of documents that we can go back. The fact that we can go to the Chester Beatty manuscripts. The fact that we can go to all the manuscripts. We have 365 manuscripts of the New Testament alone that begin to appear even before Islam came onto the world stage. Therefore, why is it Islam can't even come up with one document of their Quran from the 7th century? Mock me as you want to, Muhammad, but you've got to come up with some better material than that. Don't give me oral tradition. Don't give me speculation. Show me a manuscript that you can prove that sits at the same time that Muhammad lived, the same time that Uthman lived, and I can show you that we can beat you by hundreds of years. I thank God for the Bible, and I thank God for his tradition, and I thank God for those people who spoke about him, and I thank God that we can show that Christianity is historical. Prove it to me now. I'm not going to mock you like you mocked me. I'm going to let you now speak freely. Go ahead.
I'm a young man. Let me have my fun. All right. Now you've made a challenge. I'm going to meet your challenge unlike you, because people would have realized now that I have quoted scholars like Bar Ehrman, who have written scholarly books, who have made it very patently clear to people like yourself, who believe that actually the earliest manuscripts of the Bible are the ones I've mentioned. L source, M source, Q source, Matthew, Mark, Luke. John is old. Now these sources come about, as he's mentioned and admitted today, about 100 years after the Bible. Now, after Jesus. Having said that, let me meet his challenge. He says, why is it the case that you don't find that the Quran, first of all, and the Hadith, obviously supplementary to the Quran, has been written down? Wait a minute. What a lie that is. What a lie that is. Let's start with the Quran, since it's higher. Ibn al-Jazari mentions in Tayyibatul Nashr, which I'm sure you don't know what that is. It's a book, a scholarly book, written. He says that there are 3 conditions for a Quran to be accepted. Condition number 1, it must be memorized and there must be an oral transmission, as he's alluded. Condition number 2, it has to be concurrent with the Arabic language. Condition number 3, there must be something written as well. These conditions are all met with the Uthmani script of the Quran, which is why you will find no doubt that the Masahif, or the books of the Quran, which are in Turkey and in Sana'a, in Yemen, yes, they do go back to the time of Uthman in 651. And they are radiocarbon dated to a degree of 99.9%. 99.9%, refute me today. There is a written book of the Quran as well as the chain, as well as its concurrency with the Arabic language. That's what we're bringing forward today. We're not coming here to say that the Quran is merely but memorized. No, there is a written Quran, and it's there for everybody to see. In fact, there's more than one. Point number 1. As for the hadith, there are written ahadith as well. What are you talking about? No doubt there are written ahadith. In fact, so much hadith is written that it becomes a condition of the acceptance of hadith for the person who is able to write the hadith, for him to have what you call dabt. Dabt is either you have good memory and or you can write well. So the one who's writing the hadith and is transmitting it has to be able to write properly. This is a condition of Mustalah al-Hadith. Having said that, the companions of the Prophet wrote the hadith, and he was instructed, the Prophet instructed them, as is in the authentic hadith, not to write it in Mecca, but then in Medina when the injunctions came down, he told them to write it. Which is why you'll find the Khadim of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he wrote the hadith down. They were written down. This is why, I'm sorry to say, but someone who's not acquainted with the primary source, primary language of Islam, when they come to the Quranic and Islamic discourse, they fumble because they see in their minds, okay, the first hadith book is Ibn Ishaq, or it's, for example, Al-Bukhari. But wait a minute, it's the first compilation, mean that the actual hadith was not written down before? How humiliating! How humiliating! That's absolutely not necessary and absolutely not true. I've explained to you how and why. Moreover now, how could you, from your position of Christianity, someone whose manuscripts have literally been changed hundreds of thousands of times, about there are more inconsistencies in the Bible than words in the Bible. There are 400,000 words in the Bible. There are more inconsistencies, there's more variances in the Bible than words in the Bible. According to Bart Ehrman, 97%, wait a minute, 97% of the manuscripts have been found of the Bible are after the 9th century, which is 2 centuries after Prophet Muhammad. So your Bible, 97% of the manuscripts comes after our Quran. How dare you stand there and talk to us about scriptural integrity? How dare you, my friend? No way, no way, no way. This is not acceptable. We will not accept that. You have completely humiliated yourself today, Jay Smith. You have embarrassed yourself. How dare you? I mean, how embarrassing that is. Today, get me a chain. That's the challenge. A chain with the book that goes back to Jesus. We're ready to accept Christianity today. Let's do it. Get me the chain with the book. Don't talk to me about scriptural integrity when you have none and you have no documents to back up your claims. Jay, go ahead.
This is going to be fun. All right, let's go and let's just unpack each one of the major manuscripts that he's not aware of. The Topkapi manuscript. When was it written? See, he says it's been written by Uthman. Let's look and see what the Muslim scholars are saying today. Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç, Dr. Ekmel Nisanalu, your leading scholars in Islam, they have now looked at the 6 major manuscripts from 2002 to 2007 over 5 years. They are the only ones that have looked at all of these 6 major manuscripts. They've looked at the Topkapi. What are they now saying? This is from the mid-8th century. That's 100 years after Uthman. It only has 78 to 99%, depending on how much you want it, which one you're going to quote, of the Quran that is readable today. But even in the Quran that is readable today, there are 2,230 manuscript variants from the Quran that we use today, the Hafs Quran. 2,230 manuscript variants. That words or phrases that are different than the Quran we use today. 2,270. Thanks for correcting me. Let's look at the Topkapi. Sorry, let's look at the Samarkand in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. That only goes up to Surah 43. There's 114 surahs in the Quran. Much of the Quran is missing. What's more, Tahir Altıkılıç, Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç says, when you look at this manuscript, it is so full of errors, it has so many grammatical mistakes, it's an embarrassment. Whoever wrote it did not know very good Arabic. Don't use it. It is from the early 8th century, 60 to 70 years after Uthman. Let's go to the Husayni manuscript in Cairo. That's from the 9th century. That's 200 years later. It has a manuscript variants. Let's go to the Ma'il manuscript right here in the British Library. That only goes up to Surah 43. But you didn't know that, did you? Because Muslims refuse to look at the newest research. Keep up with the newest research by your own scholars. Bart Ehrman has never done any material on the Quran. Now let's see what it has. Let's go to the Sana manuscript that you love so much. The Sana manuscript has many different small pieces. The largest piece of it only is 23% of the Quran. And in that 23%, it has 93 manuscript variants. It is dated to 705, but that's only part of it. Much of it also is dated at a later part, at a later date. The that's the Petropolitan manuscript. Can you see, folks, 6 major manuscripts. They are all from the 8th century. Not one of them is from the 7th century. Not one of them is complete. Not one of them agrees with each other. And not one of them agrees completely with the Quran that we have today. So when was your Quran canonized? When was the Quran that we have today finalized? In 1924 at Al-Azhar University by a bunch of scholars 93 years ago. Prince Philip is older than your Quran. And that's why you need to look at the historical evidence. Don't come to me with platitudes. But did you notice he still hasn't come up with any manuscripts that are existing today for the Hadith prior to 833? He cannot come up with anything prior to 833. Even the one that he's going to come up with for Al-Bukhari is not from 870. It is from the 11th century. The earliest manuscript we have is from the 11th century. We have nothing even from the time of Al-Bukhari. So be careful what he's going to say. I'm not going to sit and mock him as he talks like he does with me. I'm just going to ask every one of you to realize that history is now catching up with Islam and with the Quran. He said that the Sana manuscript has been carbon dated. Yes, it has. Look at the dates of the carbon dating that's coming now out of Toulouse, that's coming out of Lyon, that's coming out of Arizona at the carbon dating labs. The carbon dates for those manuscripts go back to 443 AD. Muhammad was born in 570 AD. That's over 100 years before Muhammad. What are you going to do with that? Be careful the claims you make. And if you're going to use Bart Ehrman, for heaven's sakes, that's laughable. Bart Ehrman has been destroyed by most of the reputable Christian scholars today. He does not know his material. He does not know his craft. I would rather you would go back to the Muslim scholars. Go back to Dr. Altakulic. Go to Dr. Ekbiladin Isanalu. Go back to the men who know their craft, who have seen the material, who have looked at it, and who have also come up with their conclusions. Thank God we've done that with our Bible. I'll show you what we have in the next 5 minutes concerning what we have for our Bible versus what you have for your Quran.
Thank you.
Jesus.
Listen to me. This is, I'm telling you, the most outrageous claim. The first thing he said was that I don't know what the dates you gave. If you go to any reputable search or any kind of, anyone who knows anything, when is the Sana'a manuscript carbon dated till 651, which is the time of Uthman ibn Affan? How do we know that? Because Uthman ibn Affan came around in that time. That's when it was canonized for the second time. There was a first canonization at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when Zayd ibn Thabit did the first canonization, and then the second one. As for the variants that he's talking about, that's a lie. There isn't 2,700 variants. What he's talking about is their tajweed. Now I'll tell you what we mean, just in a very simple way. Say for example, if I say for example a word and another word, sometimes you have something called four harakas, yeah? So I make a med for four harakas, like that. His variant is basically, if I say like that he considers a variant. This is not what we're talking about. If you look at the variants that are actually changes in meaning, there are few in number, and they are justified by the fact that the Prophet Muhammad had revelation of 7 ahruf. Now let me ask you a very simple question. What is the difference between a harf and a qira'ah? Since you know now your stuff and you've been reading your stuff, and I'm sure you do all these things, in your opinion, what's the difference between a harf and a qira'ah? Because if you don't know what a harf is, then you won't know what a qira'ah is. The qira'ahs have ahruf differences, and these differences go back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ with all chains, and they're all been written down. So it's not 2,000, that's completely a lie and false. For example, let me give you an easy example. If you've got Malik and Malik, Malik is repeated in the Quran, is 10 qira'at. 6 of those qira'at have Malik, and 4 of them have Malik. 4 of them have Malik. So you have 2 differences represented over 10 different qira'at. These 2 differences go back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ through a chain and through the written Quran. That was to facilitate for different tribes, and they do have different meaning. We've made this very clear. Now, 2,000, that's a number which cannot be justified, and you'll never be able to prove it. Third point, he's saying that I've not been able to bring any evidences for the hadith. I say generally, that's completely a lie. The thing is, it doesn't have a name, like the mustalahat or the terminological expressions he used. Sometimes it's just named after the Sahabi, Ibn Mas'ud, Abu Huraira. All of these individuals, they wrote the hadith down. So you say the suhuf or the writings of, and then we say the name of the Sahabi. And these things are still available with us. So for you to say it's not been written is nothing but a lie. It's not true. You cannot substantiate that. You have to disprove what I've just said. You say, no, actually Abu Huraira,
you have your graph with all the
didn't
things.
write anything down. You have to say that the Sahaba didn't write it, that these manuscripts I'm telling you of the hadith don't exist. You have to say that. But you'll never be able to make that claim, because that claim would be nothing but falsehood. Now, having defended Islam, let's go back to Christianity. Because it seems to me like you have not answered the question of where is the provenance, the chain of provenance that goes back to Jesus Christ. Where is the person, or where are the people that have seen Jesus Christ? Where is the Bible anyways? Why is 97% of the Bible, according to Bart Ehrman, manuscripts that came after the 9th century? Answer the questions. These are questions. I've answered your questions. Now it's time for you to answer my questions. This is how people reach true conclusions. You bring your claims, I bring my claims, you ask your questions, I ask my questions. I answer yours, now it's time for you to answer mine. Where are the manuscripts? Where is the Bible? Where is the original Bible? Who saw Jesus? This is my question. Give me an answer. Why are there so many variants which have theological implications that are different to each other?
I want that one graph. That one graph.
I dare you today to find one variant stylistic which goes back to the Prophet Muhammad which contradicts each other. I can find you a dozen that has theological implications which contradict each other in the Bible. How can you explain the fact that the church had a creedal development? 325, 342, 381, 451. All of these times have shown that the creeds of the Christians have nothing but changed. They've changed time and time again. My question to you, Jay Smith, is how comes you're believing a Christianity which has been developed after Jesus in 381 when Theodosius, when he forced the people to only accept the triune understanding of Jesus? Where is this in the Bible? Where is it in the Old Testament that the Holy Spirit is God? Your theology is built on nothing.
When I'm ready for it.
Your theology is time up. So
okay, have you noticed he still doesn't want to go back to the manuscript evidence? But unless you have manuscripts, you can make all the claims you want. If you don't have the manuscript evidence,
how many are we doing?
You do one more, then I'll do one more after this, okay? If we don't have the manuscript evidence, then you're going to have a problem. That's why I said Islam with a small I is what he's telling you. Islam with a big I, the historical Islam, is proving to be inaccurate. He has not kept up with the latest material. He's not even read Ekmeladin. He's not even read Isanalu. He's not gone back to Altakulich. You must go back to your own Muslim scholars. Keep going to Bart Ehrman. He's done nothing on the Quranic manuscripts. He won't know diddly squat. But more than that, folks, have you noticed? Unless you're going to show historically from the 7th century that you can even show one Quran that comes from the time of Uthman, stop claiming it. You can't prove it. There's none in existence. And the 6 earliest manuscripts that you have, every one of them are full of manuscript variants. Now, Dr. Dan Brubaker, did his doctoral thesis in 2014 looking at all the 6 manuscripts. He wanted to find manuscript variants. He wanted to find maybe 15. That's all he needed. He took pictures of all the manuscripts. Guess what he found? He found over 200 insertions in the manuscripts. He found over 500 erasers where they erased complete words, complete phrases. He found copies that had copies of copies where they had tapings, where they had coverings, where they had writings over top of the coverings and over top of the tapings. 2,200 different changes in these manuscripts. What was most troubling is that these changes continued up until the 9th and 10th century. For 200 years, they were still changing the Quran. They were still changing these 6 manuscripts. None of them are from the 7th century. They only begin to appear in 705, and they continue to be changed up until the 10th century, 200 to 300 years later. Now deal with that, Muhammad. I know this cannot be over your head because they can all understand it. Now let's go back to the biblical manuscripts. He said that none of the biblical manuscripts or none of the writers knew Jesus. I've already said Matthew and John were with Jesus for the last 3 years of his ministry. They were eyewitnesses to what they wrote. Did we have the manuscripts, their original? No, because they were written on papyrus, which disintegrates. That's why copies need to be made immediately. But that's why we do have papyri. You can see it even in the British Library. And by the 6th century, we have 235 of these copies. 365 of these copies. That's 100 years before the first Islamic manuscript. 150 years before the first Islamic manuscript even comes to existence. What is interesting, go and look at the Sinaiticus here in the British Library. It's there, you can go look at it. All 27 books. written in the 4th century, 300 years before Islam, and yet it identifies with the Bible that we have today. More than that, we have 19,800 translations in 11 different languages. These all are the same. What's more than that, we have 2,135 lectionaries from the 6th century, 100 years before Islam, which agree with the manuscript evidence. We have 5,300 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin Vulgates, 9,000 in other language. Take a look and see if they all agree. So where is he getting off quoting Bart Ehrman? We're having a debate, sir. Where does he get off talking about Bart Ehrman, saying 97% of the Bible disagrees? Prove it to me. And I'd love to see where Bart Ehrman ever said that. You're lying when you say 97%. He never said that. He wouldn't be so stupid to say that. But folks, we have something even better. The early church fathers' quotations. The early church fathers wrote letter after letter, and they would write down scripture verse after scripture verse in these letters. Dr. David Dalrymple and Dr. Jean Burgun spent their whole lives collecting these quotations, and they came up with 86,000 of these quotations, 36,000 of them that predated the 4th century. That's 300 years before Islam. They look at those quotations and look and see if they don't agree with the manuscript evidence, and they don't agree with the translations, and they all agree also with the heritage, the lectionaries. Every one of them agrees. So where is Bart Ehrman coming off? That's why we don't accept Bart Ehrman, and that's why I love my Bible. Okay, now this is your summation, then I'll do my summation. 5-minute summation.
You start.
You start before me.
So you're gonna finish, yeah?
I'll finish, yeah. So you do the first, then I'll do this.
Why should we sell churches and rent people?
Some of what he said is falsehood mixed with truth. And other parts of what he said is pure falsehood. So let me go with the falsehood mixed with truth first. He said that there are some copies of the Quran which have parts taken in and parts taken out and things written on the side. That's true. There are some parts of the Quran written by some of the Sahaba themselves which have this, which have, for example, things written on the side. What is that? That is their tafsir book. Basically, the Sahaba, in order to do tafsir or exegesis of the Quran, they would have their own copy of the Quran and they would write on the top of that Quran certain things which are additional to it, which are not part of it. Now, these books are known by the scholars of Islam to be books which are not the Quran. Why? Because as I've mentioned to you before, in the book Tayyibatul Nashr by Ibn al-Jazari, he mentions 3 conditions for something to be called the Quran. One of them is it has to be concurrent with what we call Rasma Uthmani, which is the script of Uthman. Number 2 is it has to be concurrent.
Could you just show me some of those pages of Dan Brubaker's material?
Now that easily dismisses all of these
just pull them out.
variants that he's talking about, which are not necessarily fitting into that category. You'll find Qurans, there are some Qurans that have in them things put in and taken out, but they are not considered Qurans by us, basically. In a nutshell, we only do qira'ah in the salah, we only read out of the Quran that which fulfills those 3 criteria, which can be summarized in the qira'at al-ashar, the 10 narrators of the Quran. And this has all a chain back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As for the hadith thing, I mentioned once, twice and thrice that different companions, many of them, wrote it down. And the names of the manuscripts are the names of the companions. They're merely called the scriptures according to, for example, Abu Hurairah.
Oh, here, let me see stuff to cover.
These things are written down before Bukhari, before Ibn Ishaq. You have not answered this. How could you access it anyways? This is Arabic resources. I've proven today you don't know how to speak Arabic. So how can you access materials you can't understand? It's like me going to a Chinese library and trying to understand what's going on. So you have no right to tell me what does and doesn't exist from an Arabic primary source material perspective. You have to learn from me, not tell me. That's point number 1. Point number 2, as it relates to the Bible, I'm happy that he admitted that generally there is nothing at the time of Jesus. Why are you making an argument against me then? You're throwing a stone and you live in a glass house. You're telling me that you don't have anything when you've just admitted you have nothing yourself. What are you talking about? You've asked me to prove it. I've done so using 3 methods and you haven't failed to do so using even 1. So here the question will remain for you in the summation. Give me one chain of provenance that goes back to the Jesus himself, where the companions of Jesus, they saw Jesus, they wrote about Jesus. You said Matthew, Mark, Luke. They are pen names. They are pen names. Who was Matthew? What was his second name? Give me some information about him. We have something called the Ilm al-Rijal. Ilm al-Rijal is the biographical information of all of the people that are in the chains of narration for the Muslims. We know, we have an MI5 record, we have a CID record, we have an FBI record of, and I know FBI and CID is something that, you know, usually consider me as needing to be in contact with terrorism and all these things. But generally speaking, we have an MI5 record of all of the people in the biographies of these people in the chains. Where are your biographical information? Who was Matthew? Give me some information about him according to the scholarly works. No! Don't tell me he was someone who just saw Jesus. Give me historical, independent information from the biblical discourse. Don't come to that with this such a weak argument. Point number 2. He said that the early church fathers, he talked about the early church fathers and these things, they agreed on the same things. No, they didn't. Give me one early church father that talked about the Trinity as you believe it today. That's my challenge. Before you leave, if you don't do it, give me one and their quote that they believe Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all of them are one. One early church father before 381. Yes. One early church father. Yes. But if you say that he doesn't exist, such a church father doesn't exist, that would be to say that the predecessors knew more than the predecessors. You're saying that the older people, the newer people, knew more than the younger people. As for the scholars you quoted, they are not scholars that we are relying upon. We told you, we have the information based on the Arabic record. You don't have that. So how could you tell me about the Arabic scholarship? So here, point number 1, a chain of provenance that goes back to Jesus. Point number 2, one early church father who said that he believed Father, Son, Holy Spirit and one, all in one. And number 3, if you can't do that, will you admit that you have nothing to say anymore?
Okay, let's start with that. He's had his summation. Let me give you some names. Ignatius. He was writing in the late 2nd century. He knew the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Tertullian, he was one that coined the name. He was one that coined the name of the Trinity. He was one that actually gave us the word. It's nothing more than a doctrinal representation of what we see in the Bible. But what about Clement? What about Polycarp? What about Athanasius? These were all early church fathers. Every one of them believed in the Trinity. I've already given you 5. I've given you 5. Now that's interesting. Have he not yet told you of any manuscript that's from the 7th century? He cannot name any manuscript from the 7th century. Have you noticed? Secondly, he has not given you any manuscripts of the Hadith that is earlier than the 9th century. He still cannot do it. He says we trust in oral tradition. We trust in the chain of name, the isnad. Folks, why did they not write down what they were quoting? Why could they not write it down? Were they incapable of doing it? Were they that poorly educated? Please don't say that. The fact is they didn't write it down because there was nothing to write down. We haven't even got what we now know about Muhammad historically. That will have to be for another debate. We haven't even told you what we now know about your earliest mosques. We can't find one mosque that is facing Mecca until 731 AD. Muhammad died in 632. We're going to get into that in another debate. But let's just look and see what I was talking about. Take a look at these insertions. These are just a few of the over 200 insertions we have been able to find from the earliest manuscripts. Take a look at the erasers. These are 500.
I'm going to have to ask you to come off the platform.
Yeah,
everybody has to come off the platform.
Okay.
Thank you.
What time do I have so I can finish this?
Continue speaking, but you have to come off the platform. All right?
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, you can finish what you're saying.
Okay, we'll do from here. Okay, can you see? Look at these erasers. Over 250 erasers. These are now been photographed. This is new material. I know that Muhammad has not seen this yet. He's not aware of this. You need to keep up with the newest materials. Look at the erasers overwritten. There's over 500 of these. Look at this one here, overwritten without apparent erasers. Can you read it? That's why we're saying, I didn't do this work. I don't have to do this work. But I love the scholars who did this work. Dr. Don Brubaker wrote it. Dr. Dan Brubaker is the one that read it. It is his material that I'm showing today. Folks, thank God I don't have to depend on Bart Ehrman. And thank God I don't have to depend on myself. All I have to depend on those who's done the work. Muhammad, before you get up and start mimicking and mocking people, do the homework yourself. And Muslims, realize that you've got a real problem with your Quran. Realize that your Quran did not exist at the time of Uthman, did not exist in the 7th century. When it began to exist, when it started to take shape in the 8th century, the many different manuscripts that we even have today do not agree with each other. They have hundreds of manuscript variants. Araf and Kiryat should not even come into this, because I want to show you the Araf and the Kiryat. I want to show you the diagram that we are now going to do another day here. Take a look at the hundreds and hundreds, thousands of variants that we have now found in the different Ahuf. 45,000 variants.
It's not up, sir. It's not up. Very disrespectful. It's not up yet.
It's not up yet. Don't walk away yet. Listen to this. We're going to show you exactly how many Ahuf we've been able to find. We've now found 37 different Arabic Qurans. Not just 26.
That's not true.
27 different Arabic Qurans. We're going to come back and show you, and we're going to find more, are we not? But folks, wait till we show you how many variants they have. My goodness, and I'm so glad we don't have this problem with the Bible. Folks, be careful of who you listen to. Be careful of what you understand, but make sure you come back to the Bible. Thank God we've done our homework. Muslims, do your homework before you make your claims. Make sure you know what you're talking about. God bless you. We'll see you next week. Jesus!